I'm George. So I'm really super excited to have Ash talk to us today. I remember reading Running Lean, which is a book I think every product manager should read, and really put a good framework on how good customer interviews can be done and how you can actually validate ideas before you start building them. And that book alone tremendously helped me in my product career. So really appreciative that Ash is here today to actually talk to us about some new ideas. Specifically, I know you saw the title, probably Don't Start with MVP. That's interesting. Let's see what that is all about, because everyone else is talking about MVPs. So again, Ash is an entrepreneur. He's a writer. He has an awesome blog on Medium, so you guys should definitely check it out. He speaks all around the world. So again, we're really appreciative that he's here in Austin. By the way, he lives in Austin as well, which is what a lot of people are really surprised by. But anyway, welcome, Ash, and the stage is all yours. Give it a round of applause.
Thank you, George. All right, welcome everyone. Can you all hear me well? Perfect. All right, so I'm Ash. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff today, but I'd like to start by setting some context. So we'll start with a brief history of product development. As you can see from here, I'm going back about 100 years and showing where we have been. So a lot of the old, I call it old, but a lot of the old ways of building products was really optimized around efficiency. So when we were mass producing things and working in factories, the name of the game was who can build the most amount of product in the least amount of time. And then fast forwarding, as we got more digital, we went down into stage delivery, which became waterfall. It got coined that in the 70s. And then we began to enter the PC era, and building products wasn't fast enough. So we had to get kind of faster iteration, and that's where Agile came along. And then things changed to even a faster speed. As we moved into the internet, things started to happen where customers began to demand things before we even got time to deliver anything to them, and that kind of spawned this new era of continuous innovation, or the lean startup. Now, the point I want to raise here is that the reason we go from one methodology to the other is not because a bunch of thought leaders get in a room and decide it's now time to change. This is all in reaction to the way customers consume and demand products, and that's something we'll get into and talk about what's changing. This slide is a bit busier, but you can kind of scan it. It highlights some of the differences between these methodologies. So a lot of waterfall was about upfront requirements gathering, and then this long flat line where we went away for long periods of time to build, then launch and do market validation. Agile has more touch points, more iteration with customers, and lean is a lot like waterfall, only compressed. So if you can do waterfall in a day, you're doing lean startup in a very rapid cadence, very rapid pace. And some companies do that. So that's an extreme, but some companies do get there. So the point that I want to raise here is that waterfall had a place, of course. I mean, we had many businesses built around that. It worked at a time when there was when there was not lots of competition. So when you could build a product and your customers didn't have many choices, where would they go? So you could offer to start with a product, and if it didn't work, you had time to iterate and get yourself back on track. That's how innovation was done. In government, there's the old joke of raise twice as much money as you need, one to actually get the product right. So that's how things used to be. Today, though, we live in a very different world. There's a lot more competition thanks to the internet, cloud computing, all the things that we talk about. There are startups popping up everywhere. As a result, that luxury is no more. You have to get on the right track pretty quickly. So today, the companies of today realize that in order to find your next big idea, you have to test a lot of things, and you have to do this continuously. A lot of the companies, or the logos shown here, are examples of companies who do this at an extreme scale, where they have this culture of rapid experimentation. Many years ago, Amazon came out and said, we're going to do this Amazon Prime thing, and Wall Street kind of said, are you sure? That doesn't sound like a very good thing. They said the same thing about Amazon Web Services. Both are 1 billion units, $1 billion units in the business today. So they were all experiments. Yes, it could have gone nowhere, but they were kind of home runs out of the ballpark. So that's kind of what's different with this new way of thinking, that even the leaders sometimes don't know if this is going to work, but they're willing to experiment. And this has become the new unfair advantage, speed of learning. If you can outlearn your competition, you start to win. If you can do this once, you build a product that starts to work. If you can do this continuously and outlearn your competition before they do, then you can stay relevant to your customers and see your business model thrive and grow. What I want to raise here is that this is relative to your industry. So if you're in a car company, you don't have to go as fast as Facebook. That's just silly and impossible. But if you go faster than all the other car companies, like Tesla is doing at the moment, you can still get to market faster. You can still create a new category of electric cars. And now every car company has an electrification unit and a mandate to build an electric car in the next 5 years. Right? So that type of stuff only happens when you're going fast and you're outlearning competition. All right. So let's talk about the lean startup. So what does that really look like? I know how many of you have heard of the lean startup or familiar with the principles. And I know with the title of a talk, that's kind of a giveaway. But what comes to mind when you think of the lean startup? What are the two things usually that come to mind? I'll say the MVP is one of them. A lot of people talk about MVPs. What's the other thing that comes to mind? Build, measure, learn, which I like to call experiment. So yes, we distill the lean startup down to two things. So if you have a big idea, don't spend 9 months building out that big idea because that's going to be a form of waste. What if you build something nobody wants? Instead, rush to build an MVP. That's the principle in theory. And let's go around this build, measure, learn loop. Let's put it in front of the customers, get some feedback, and start the learning process. And the thinking is that they will help us to refine, they will help us to iterate, and all that makes sense. So don't spend 9 months building something nobody wants. Start with a 3-month version, and if that doesn't work, iterate and refine from there. The only problem is that I have found a lot of MVPs just get stuck. They don't go anywhere. And the reason is that we start off with an idea, and if it isn't a reasonably good idea, we just give it to customers, and they don't become testers. So going back to what I said early on, they have a lot more choices. They're not going to be a beta tester of yours. They're not going to give you feedback. They're just going to leave. And if you're doing this in a B2C environment, they leave silently. You don't even know this. You look at your metrics, and they're tanking, and then you wonder what's going on. You start to build more features in the chase of the killer mythical feature, which, by the way, almost never comes. We are chasing that inflection point, and we go around in circles. And that's kind of the story that we hear. So all the metrics of being a lean startup still apply. We're running lots of experiments. We're building lots of MVPs as a result of that. So that's the problem that I want to address today, is how do we kind of tackle this? We have to start by asking, where do these ideas come from? If you look at the build, measure, learn loop, it's an experiment. And if you look at by nature, experiments require inputs. And if the inputs are flawed, this is where people get stuck. So a scientist doesn't go into the lab and start with experiments. They try to find good ideas, good theories, good hypotheses, and they use experiment to validate, not to be creative, not to come up with good ideas. That's the piece we sometimes miss here, is that the lean startup machine, the lean startup build, measure, learn loop, is really a fast idea validator. It's a fast idea tester. If you put a good idea in, it's going to tell you quickly your idea is good or maybe a little bit off, and you can iterate and refine from there. But if you just throw junk at it, if you just throw a guess at it, which is a bad idea, it tells you very quickly it's a bad idea, but you may not be able to go anywhere because we need customer feedback for that. So if we look at different sources of ideas, I made a list once, and these were the 7 that I was able to find. You can kind of scan them and see. At the heart of all of these, they all come from kind of different places, R&D, analogs, other companies doing things. But at the heart of all of them, we all suffer from this bias, which is they all kind of start with a solution or very quickly get to a solution, and then we build that MVP and see, does it really work? And if it doesn't, let's try to iterate. But the problem is that the weeks, months, sometimes several months you spend getting to that MVP is a form of waste, because even when you build it, it doesn't give you the results that you want. So this is how I like to think about it, is that when we start with a solution, it's like building a key. And we've all gotten very good at product development. We can build a nice-looking key pretty quickly, but the problem then is we have to find doors to open. What I want to talk about today is how do you flip that around? How do we start with problems or doors, not infinite number, but we constrain it down, then the key building becomes a lot easier because that's what we're good at. That's our strengths. This part isn't. So if you can start here, you can actually create this mindset shift in your minds, in your teams, where you can flip this around and you start to see better results this way. Now so this is kind of the shift, is that the old world way of doing things was let's push some solutions out over the fence at customers, see how they react, let's use metrics and all those things to tell us. But as I said, the qualitative feedback isn't there because people don't talk to you when you give them something that doesn't connect with them, doesn't deliver value. You could say, well, I'll just rely on metrics. Well, even that doesn't help you because you may be able to tell exactly where the problem is happening, but not why. For that, you need that qualitative loop. I can tell when I look at many SaaS products, I can tell that no one is buying, but when you dig a bit deeper, we don't know why they're buying. For that, you have to talk to customers, but if customers don't talk to you, you don't learn that why. So that's kind of the challenge. We fall into that catch-22. So let's now shift gears and start talking about ways we can start with better problems or how we can start the process. The first place usually is deconstruct your idea. So how many of you here have seen this? This is the lean canvas. So I see a number of hands going up. This is essentially a one-page capture of your idea. Some people can use it as a replacement for a business plan. But even we find a lot of product owners, product managers, product folks use this without intent of a business plan, or they're not in business, they're not creating it for that purpose, but it's just a way of deconstructing your idea. So it's much like you are building a house. You start with some kind of a sketch. You start with an architectural blueprint. It doesn't have to be fully detailed, but you need to at least sketch it out. That's what this is for. So you can begin to start talking about, I have this solution in mind, who might my customers be, what problems might I solve, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle. The first time you do this, your ideas they may be crystal clear in your mind, but when you create one of these, it exposes a lot of gaps. You begin to realize that you didn't know what you didn't know, and that's a helpful exercise to go through. When you try to share your idea with someone else, they begin to question things when they see your idea in its raw form, and that's very healthy. Right? So that conversation is great. In the past, you put an entrepreneur on stage, you put an innovator on stage, and they'll just spend the whole time talking about the solution, they'll talk about the technology, and that takes up all the time. Here, as you can see, the solution box is purposefully very small because you want to talk about other things. So this would be a way of taking that baseline of your idea, try to figure out who your customers are, your problems are. What we eventually want to do is narrow down onto these boxes because these are the pillars that hold up the idea. If your customers are wrong and the problems are wrong, going to what I said early on, you can build an MVP, you can build a solution, but it's not going to resonate. And if that doesn't happen, no one's going to give you feedback, no one's going to pay you money. Your channels that you've been building up, your unfair advantages that you're building up all come crashing down. So these are the fundamental pillars that you want to start with. And these are the questions we want to ask ourselves. In other words, who is the customer? And to me, a customer is very clear. A customer pays you. Other people in your system are just users in your system. And they're valuable and sometimes even riskier than customers. But you want to make that distinction. You want to know who is the customer, who is the user, if you've got multiple actors. We want to identify early adopters. So of our segments that we're going after, what are the characteristics of people that are most likely to buy from us? And then let's start, if you're starting with new innovation, let's start with problems that our early adopters have. Don't think about problems that your 1,000 customer is going to have. Think about the first 10. And let's be very specific, because when you try to market to everyone, when you're talking to that 1,000 customer on your landing page, it doesn't resonate. You want to talk to your first 10, and then your next 100, and then your 1,000 customers. So you have to narrow down. The last piece we'll get into a lot more detail is how do they solve the problem today? We want to talk about that. So this, in theory, also works. Now, there are challenges with starting with problems. We humans aren't wired for problems. We're very uncomfortable around problems. And so when we start with the lean canvas, and I tell you, don't start with the solution box, start with the customer box or the problem box, the innovator bias is hard to shut off. And this is what people do, is they'll keep the solution in their mind, and instead of asking, what customers can I solve for my customers, if you've already decided you're going to build a hammer, you ask yourself, what problem can I solve for my customers with a hammer? So you're already injecting your solution in here and biasing the whole lean canvas. And so people kind of go through the solution box, and as a result, they end up inventing or faking problems to justify the thing that they already want to build. And that's not productive. So that's a problem that we see. So we'll talk about some ways of circumventing that. It's still a great exercise. So I still find that doing the lean canvas is good, even if you just identify your own innovator bias. If you realize that you are starting with solution and justifying the solution, that's healthy. You can't fix a problem unless you know you have a problem, and that's step one. The next thing is, why don't we just ask our customers? Talking to customers around problems is, again, tricky. Sometimes you only get surface answers because your customers oftentimes don't know themselves. That's why some of us, maybe not all of us, but some of us go to therapists or psychologists because they can help get into some of those deeper root causes. Your customers don't spend enough time introspectively studying themselves and studying their problems. They don't see these things. The other problem, of course, is that if they know, unless they know you, like you, trust you, they're not going to be open to you. It makes them vulnerable. If you go and tell them, hey, you have this problem, they might deny it, they might shield it, so they're not going to tell you about it, they might get defensive about it. Those are kind of challenges. Some products like this one have a different challenge, which is they are desire-driven. And so if you go around asking people, what problem did Angry Birds solve, or what problem does this movie that you just watched solve, it's going to you sound like a crazy. People don't understand what you're asking them. So you can't lead with problem. You have to start somewhere else. When we ask customers also about what can I build, and this is where the surveys and focus groups tend to go, we get a lot of biases there because customers, too, are solution biased. Anyone here that's close to product has probably lived this. You look at your backlog, and they're essentially solutions disguised as problems. The customer is asking you things, and 10 customers could be asking you those things, but when you build those things, oftentimes they don't use it. And that's, to channel Steve Jobs, is because customers don't often know what they want. They are trying to kind of give they know something is wrong, and they are putting their innovator's hat, which some can wear well, others cannot. And so they ask for a bunch of things like add this button or build this feature for me, but when you build it, that doesn't really get the job done. It doesn't really solve the problem. So is there a better way? And so today I want to share with you some newer work that I've been doing on how to kind of think through this and how to almost use a backdoor approach, not start with problems, but rather start somewhere else. So we'll talk about this thing called the innovator's gift. The idea is very simple, and it's something that I had observed in the past. Others in the jobs to be done community were talking about this, and it made a lot of sense. But I think it's still been very simple, and so it's gleaned over, but I think it's a very powerful concept. And that is that there is no such thing as a perfect solution, as you'll see here in a second. Every solution spits off its problems, and if you look at a lot of new solutions that come in the market, they don't work in isolation. They work by anchoring themselves against some of the old solutions that are out there. So new problems we're solving are created as byproducts of old solutions. And what that tells us is that we can actually explore for problems. When you look at a lot of innovators, entrepreneurs, they spend a lot of time saying, how do I invent problems to justify my solution? A better approach is to go and study some of these existing alternatives or some of these old solutions looking for problems. And if you can find those problems, it creates an opening where you can create something better. So I'll illustrate that. Some of this can be a bit high level still. So I mentioned outcome or jobs to be done. How many of you are familiar with the theory of jobs to be done? All right, so actually maybe half of you are. Now I ran into jobs to be done, and the first time I saw it, it got me very excited. As I tried to practice it, I realized it was like magic. It's like a magic trick. When you see it and you know the secret, it makes sense. But trying to recreate it on your own, not so easy. And when you start kind of digging deeper, there are many different thoughts, many different definitions of what a job is. And so it became pretty complex very quickly. And so one of the things I wanted to do was create a much simpler way to kind of think of what is the job to be done. At a very high level, the idea of the job to be done is that we hire products to do things for us. This code is something that everyone agrees on, even though the thought leaders don't agree on a lot of things. This is what they all agree on, is that this was in many ways the inspiration or the spark of jobs to be done. And even if you have not heard of jobs to be done, you've probably seen this in some shape or form. This was a quote by a marketing professor back in the 60s, and he was trying to get across this notion that we shouldn't be focused on the tool, we should be focused on the output of the tool. A photographer doesn't go out trying to impress people by the tripod he or she is using. They try to impress people by the photos they're taking, right? So don't build a better camera or tripod, build a better photographer. That's kind of how you would think of this. So bringing this code in, if we actually dig a bit deeper, so if we ask ourselves, why do people hire a 1/4-inch drill bit? It's not for the drill bit. They're not going to do anything with the drill bit and keep that on a pedestal somewhere. It's really to get the hole, right? That's what's getting the job done for them. So that's kind of a way to think about it. Now, if you are a drill bit manufacturer, you might say, well, what are the problems here? You might observe that when you're drilling into certain surfaces that are hard, maybe the drill bits break. So you might say, well, I will build a stronger drill bit. And that's how you might come up with a drill bit made out of titanium, and you can sell that for a premium because it's a stronger drill bit, which works in those applications. So that's kind of at a very high level what this lets us do is don't focus on the tool and the features. Once you focus on what people are trying to do with it, you can begin to see how to make your product better. Now, while this was I think it's still a very powerful code, inspirational code, I find it doesn't go far enough. Anyone see why? It doesn't go far enough because people don't really want a hole in their wall. It says people want a 1/4-inch hole, not a drill bit, and I find that that's not really what I want. In this scenario, the job to be done is drill a hole. That's an intermediate step. There is something that's coming after that. I'm not going to leave a hole in my wall. That's not going to be the desired outcome. It's actually an undesired outcome. So the hole is an intermediate step. This is a hole in plywood, so maybe this is my garage. Maybe I'm trying to hang some tools, right? So that may be the job to be done. So that's kind of a higher level. So you have to go to that bigger context. In this picture, there are actually two problems. I talked about one of them, which was the hole. Anyone see the second one? You can just shout out the answer. There's the shavings. There's a bit of this mess. It's what I call an immediate problem. So I drill this hole. I've got these shavings. I have to now go back in the house, get a mop and sweeper and kind of sweep that up. Not a big deal, but an annoyance because I didn't expect that to happen. So that's an immediate problem. But this is the more latent problem. And this is one that I'm actually nervous about is anxiety. If I'm drilling this hole, I make sure all the measurements are right. What if I don't drill in the right place, right? I now have to patch that up and drill somewhere else. So that there's a lot of anxiety associated with that. Also, it's a latent problem because in the time being, I'm going to hang some tools there so the hole is hidden. But what if I move my tools one day? Now I've got a hole in the wall, and I don't want to be staring at a hole in my garage, so I have to take another trip to the hardware store, get some patch, and patch that all up, right? So that's why this is an undesired effect, and this is an opportunity. What if I could tell you you could get the job done, in this case, putting up tools in your garage without this mess problem and without the hole? Would you? And what if it were cheaper than this alternative of buying a drill and a drill bit combined, but even as a separate piece, even it's cheaper than a drill bit? Would you buy it? Probably, especially if I place it in the hardware store next to the drill bit. That's exactly what 3M did. So 3M, which is has invented a lot of glue that they've used in Post-it notes and things like that, invented a certain type of glue that could be used as mounting tape. And if you can see from the picture here, they even have the use case right on the product. So you can use it to hang tools in your garage shed. You just stick this on the wall, you stick your tools on there, and it can hang things up to 30 pounds. I think they have a version that goes up to 40 or 50 pounds. And so this, in many ways, competes with that drill bit. And that's what innovation's about. So if you're a drill bit manufacturer, you're stuck around how do I build a better drill bit, and you are kind of hit by, from the left, from a product like this one that gets the job done better, and that causes switch. Think back to music. So when you were all kind of growing up with music, you may have had the cassettes. That's how I grew up with music. That was perfectly fine. I had no reason to complain about cassettes because I knew that my predecessors were listening to music live on the radio, so they had these 8 tracks and these LPs and things that, as a kid, I was like, why would anyone listen to music on that? So I was happy with the cassette tape till the CDs came out, and then I shifted to that. Then the music went digital, the iPods came out, and Steve Jobs was telling me, don't buy a CD because you only listen to one song, and I'm like, yes, I do. That became a problem, so then I shifted all my music to digital, started burning them, bought MP3 players, and then even 1,000 songs in my pocket wasn't enough. I had to have 40 million songs in the cloud. That's when Spotify came out, and then Apple Music came out, and then Pandora came out. and now I discover music, I play them in every room with Sonus, and that was great. I thought that was the end. That job is now done, till I had kids, and they want to listen to music in different rooms, so we had to get them speakers in each room, and pulling out my phone, because they don't have their own devices, to set their music for them became a pain, until I discovered Alexa. And now I can tell Alexa, and they can tell Alexa what music to play in what rooms. And I think that's the end, but I know from what I'm telling you that that isn't. There's going to be something else that will come out 2 years from now, and we'll all switch to that. Right? So that's the nature of jobs, is that the solution changes, and it makes the job better, but the job itself doesn't change. The job of listening to music, the job of advertising, the job of getting fed, those have been around for centuries and will be. So those will not change. It's the solutions that are changing. If you as an innovator can find problems in the existing solution in that job context, you can build that next iPod or that next Alexa device. So that's kind of the message here. So how do we kind of put this to practice? So the way that we look at this is when we look at the innovator's bias, the question we ask ourselves is, here's my solution. What problems can it solve? The way we use the innovator's gift is we actually go and study what existing alternatives are people using around this job that I am also trying to tackle, and what problems can I uncover. And if I can anchor my solution against that, that allows me to differentiate myself. That allows me to stand out. So how do we apply this? So the way we apply this, there is a new canvas. You can find this. I'll have links at the end where you can download this. I'm going to break this into a story form to kind of share with you the science or the journey of how customers consume and demand products, because you have to understand that. If you can understand these forces, it makes applying a lot of the jobs to be done pretty trivial. So you have to understand what causes people to buy products. If you can understand what causes them, it gives you a lot of insights on understanding what problems they might have, where you might find them, where you might place your offers, things like that. So let's walk through this, and it should become a bit clearer. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy. I like to explain jobs in this way. So from the beginning of time, from when we are born, we have had basic needs. Some of those have been met by our parents. So when you were hungry as a baby, you cried, and you hired your parents to feed you, right? So that's the jobs to be done. So you did all these things, and certain things were done for you. As you became more independent, you had to fend for yourself. And as you became more independent further, you had to hire apartments to provide shelter. You hired maybe a car or ride sharing to provide transportation. So all those are different products you've hired along the way. And as basic needs are met, we move up this hierarchy, and we look towards the higher levels of esteem, self-actualization. That might be your career, investing in a course, trying to get better. So we're hiring these different things towards a journey that we all humans are making towards progress. Does that make sense? But at any given point in time, we are in a state of status quo. We're not all currently buying anything. You're listening to me. So at this point, certain jobs are being met, so you're not in the state of buying. So what we want to understand is what puts customers into motion, what causes them to go from status quo, which is, I know kind of all the things I already have, like you're not buying a house, you're not changing your car, you probably will leave here, you've had maybe the job of dinner has been met, some of you may be meeting other people for dinner, but you kind of know those things. So you're not in this state of looking for everything all the time. And that's what this first stage is about. So we're all in this state of status quo until something changes. This is the first law of motion, of customer motion, is that we're all in this state of, we're creatures of habit. We have got certain products that we use. If you want to have lunch tomorrow, you're not looking from an infinite list. You have a finite list, and you will narrow down when the time comes and pick that based on the situation. So until something changes, you don't look to switch your preferences. You don't look to switch or break your habits. That something is a triggering event. Ideally, that triggering event is something that happens to you, something you hear about, something you experience that causes an expectation violation. So to give you a very simple example, let's assume I'm meeting some friends after this for drinks, and I go, and the first friend is there, and he tells me that he recently bought a new car. And he spends the next 5 minutes talking about how great the new car is, how the new cars are much better than his 5 or 10-year-old car. It's got all these features, and we spent 5 minutes talking about it. I'm happy for him. Well, guess what? The next friend walks over, and she too has bought a new car, and so has the third friend. And they go on for the next 30, 45 minutes talking about all these new features, exchanging kind of tidbits of information I don't know about you, but my car, which is perfectly okay 45 minutes ago, starts to feel old. It's only 7 years old, but as I'm driving home, I start to wonder, well, should I buy a new car as well? I start noticing other cars on the road. They've always been there, but my perceptual vision for them increases. I look at billboards, I start noticing that. During the ads, which I completely ignored in the past, I start looking at car ads. That's my passive state. So I go into the state of wanting something, of desiring something, and that triggering event, very, very powerful. You want to try to uncover what that is. So that's what this canvas, by the way, is something you can use with, and I'll talk about this at the end, but something you can use with people you're trying to study to get this story out. So you want to understand if they bought something, what was that triggering event? And you want to kind of dig a bit deeper. So I'll share some examples a bit later. But that triggering event pushes them towards this hill, or up this hill towards this desired outcome. To me, the desired outcome is buying a new car. That's the first force that kind of pushes us. So that's why it's critical. Now, there is the second law, unfortunately, is that for every motivation for change, there's usually resistance to that change. And we call this, in this stage, inertia. So this is the comfort of the old way. So buying a new car is a massive undertaking, right? I'm not just going to, on the basis of 3 friends' stories, go out the next day and buy a new car. It's an expense. My old car, my loan is already paid off, so that's inertia. That's something that's done. That's a good thing. So for me to go into loan, that creates anxiety. I don't want to do that. I know what my old car is good at. I know what it's not so good at. Thinking about anything new creates anxiety. What if this car doesn't work? And then where do I even start? They talked about all these changes. Will I like those changes? I hear these new cars don't have keys. I'm used to my key. Will I be able to function without a key? So all these things kind of walk through my head, and I'm trying to weigh, the pros and cons, and the inertia usually talks me out of going off and impulsively buying a car, at least most people, right? That's because the triggering event isn't strong enough yet. Most of us need more than one triggering event. Let's say the next week my car breaks down, and I'm at the mechanic shop, and this is the second time it's happened, or maybe the third time it's happened to make it even more dramatic in the last 2 months. And I tell my mechanic, what's going on, and he's like, well, we failed to find the issue before, but we found you have a big oil leak, your engine's all busted, you're going to need a brand new engine, it's going to be $10,000, right? At that point, I'm not going to try to fix this whole car, I am done, right? So that is my shift into the next stage, and that's when my motivation for change is now greater than the resistance or the comfort of the old way. So I now go into the second stage where I am in the consideration phase. So this is where I start considering alternatives, and I start doing that more active research. Here, to the point I want to raise is that I may not limit myself just to the brand of car. I may say, well, I've been driving this brand of car. What if I go after and switch brands? That again creates anxiety, but I do some more research. Maybe I go electric. Maybe I buy a Tesla. Everyone's buying Teslas. Maybe I do that. I can help the environment. I can save some money. Maybe I do that, right? So I started looking at alternatives. Why stay within a car? You saw the example of how glues and drill bits can compete. What if you don't even buy a car? If you're in a big metropolitan city, you might live off of public transportation or live off of ride sharing, which many people are doing increasingly so. So why even hire a car and pay for all the upkeep and maintenance, which I ran into with this car? I could just live off of ride sharing, right? So I started considering alternatives which may not be direct competitors. And that's a very critical point. When we talk to innovators and we say point to your competition, they often define their competition in terms of the closest competitor, in terms of the category. So if you are doing software, and let's say you're doing productivity software, you might say, we have no competitors because we are building X and no one is building it this way. Well, I found more startups get killed not by another startup, but by email and spreadsheets, right? So if you're building analytics software or collaboration software, guess what? The whole world is doing that job probably with email and spreadsheets. And no one ever lists them in the competitive matrix. No one ever talks about how do we anchor against that, but that's what you're going up against. So that's what this is about, gets you into that more basic understanding that when people are triggered, they're going to try to find alternatives which may not be within your specific product category. Now, at this point, we start considering, and that's what this is showing, many different offers, and each one has a pull. So there are pros and cons, and that's the pro and con list. The pull of the offer pulls us towards it. Do ride sharing because you don't need a loan. You're going to save all this money. It's on demand. All of that works. But then we also have the negative force, which is the resistance, which is, will ride sharing really work? What if I'm in a hurry or I need to do things? What if I have to move stuff? Can I use ride sharing? It wouldn't work in all instances. So you start asking yourself, will it really work or not? And so we are kind of weighing all these options. And if you move forward, if a customer buys something, eventually one of them wins out. Understanding which one wins out of the consideration set is very powerful because it tells you what did they consider and what actually wins out. Now I'm going to focus this talk mostly around acquisition. So we're not going to talk about some of the other steps, but beyond acquisition, these forces still apply. So as people buy a product, they begin to experience it for the first time. They have to have this aha moment because if it doesn't happen, they give back the product. So they can still return it. It's a honeymoon period with the product. They're trying it out. I might try ride sharing and say, can I live off of ride sharing 100%? I might do that for a week. And at the end of the week, I decide, no, I can't. So I'm going to go buy a car. Right? So I'm in that period where I'm trialing software. That's what this phase is about. After incremental value delivery and incremental use, eventually I make a conclusion on whether this new solution does the job or not. And if it does, I hire that, and that becomes the new habit. That becomes the new status quo because it's been established. Now, it has its own set of inertia, its own switching costs, and the process repeats itself. That's what the journey looks like. As customers go from one to the other, we'll make sure you have these slides. You can also find some recent blog posts at leanstack.com, which have this picture there. I would challenge you to go and think of a major purchase you might have made in the last 90 days and try to fill out these forces, and it's pretty revealing. We often don't know these things are happening, but there are all these forces, the comfort of the old, the anxiety of the new, that are always tugging at each other, even when you are starting to use a product. If you can understand that journey from your customers' perspectives, it gives you a lot of insight. So let's talk about how you might use this next. So when we talk about growth of a business model, it can come from three places. There's acquisition, which is let's bring in more customers. There's retention, which is let's keep our customers longer, or let's sell them more products. There's referrals, which is let's use them to bring other people. So those are the three general ways we can grow a business. Using this framework, we define it this way. So acquisition is nothing more than causing your customer to fire their existing alternative, fire email and hire my product instead, hire Slack instead. That's what Slack is telling you. They're pretty clearly telling you email is the enemy. So they're applying this kind of in a very direct fashion. Retention is really preventing switch. So don't go elsewhere because we do the job better than anyone else. That's the message you need to give. You need to build in habits. You need to build in switching costs, and those are ways that people stay with you. And ideally, you're not holding them handcuffed. Some brands do that. Hopefully, you're holding them in a more responsible way, loyal to your brand because you're just doing a better job than anyone else. That's definitely my preference. Referrals would be causing your customers to cause switch by telling other people about how well the job is being done. So that would be the referral case. So let's focus in on acquisitions and talk about how you might apply this, just what I've shared with you, towards having a product and trying to get this out there. So the first thing I want to do is get you to forget personas, at least in the early stages of innovation and the early stages of startups, simply because oftentimes when we do personas, we start building pictures that look like this. We start imagining all the possible users, giving them names, come up with all these different attributes. The problem is that all of these are just too many, and many of these are not actionable. The art of the early adopter criteria is not 100 attributes, but rather 1 or 2 attributes that cause your customers to buy. I recommend people start with just a very simple label. So if you're working with photographers, just call them photographer. Don't put any gender, don't put any age, don't put anything into it just yet. So start with a very simple label and only add 1 more attribute. And this is the attribute that all customers have, and that's the triggering event. If you can start with these 2, it puts you in a very strong place. So let's illustrate that with an example. So let's say I'm a mattress company. I could be Casper or whoever else. But one of the things that my value proposition is we were trying to target people who have back pain. We are trying to sell them our mattress because it alleviates back pain. So if you were that mattress company, what time of day would you run that ad? And you can shout out some answers. That's the right answer. But some people said morning, some people said night, some people said 3 a.m. So this is an actual case study. And the problem with the morning is that you wake up in the morning, and yes, you have had the problem. But in terms of jobs to be done, you have many other things you have to get done. You have to maybe get your kids ready for school. You have to get ready for work. All these things are competing at that time. You're not going to buy a mattress, right? At night, you know that you're probably going to have the problem, but because the pain isn't there, your motivation that push isn't there yet. So you would probably just watch the TV or instead of doing the research, right? So you pick other things which compete with that attention. But at 2 a.m. at night, when that pain is severe and you can't sleep, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get up, you're going to turn on the TV, and you're going to see an infomercial. Or you're going to go on the online and you're going to see an ad. But let's stick with the infomercial. You're going to see this infomercial which pounds into your head with testimonial after testimonial that this mattress is good for you. And every 30 minutes, the price is being slashed. So you watch the whole thing for 2 hours, and by the end of it, you just can't resist. You just buy the mattress. And then you wake up in the morning and you tell your spouse, significant other, guess what? I just bought a mattress. It's going to be here in 2 weeks, right? So it seems like an impulsive thing, but it wasn't. It was carefully placed because of that triggering event. So that's very, very powerful. So timing matters a lot. So just by using that triggering event, I didn't have to target a whole bunch of things. I could just go to where this problem is happening. Someone has pain. I show them the painkiller or the solution, and it pulls them like a magnet. And there's no competition there. When is the worst time of the year, if you're a builder, when is the worst time of the year to advertise for homes? Any thoughts? Christmas, holidays. What if I tell you that's the best time, right? So most people will actually ratchet their advertising down around holidays because no one's buying. So if you look at the way people advertise, some people just throw ads all the time. And the worst time, the absolute worst time is when someone has just bought the house. If I've just bought a house, I'm not switching houses, right? So that's a bad time. So we don't want to start there. But the answer you gave me, so the problem with this phase is that there is no trigger. I already bought a house. I'm in that evaluation phase. I can't just give up my house. I don't buy houses on 30-day trials. I have to be committed. So that's not going to work. But most people try to operate here, which was the logic that you had, which is go at a point when people are considering other houses, which may not be the holidays. Most houses get sold in after the holidays. So March, April is when a lot of these things happen. But what I'm going to, and the problem with that phase is that at this stage, when people are considering houses, if I'm a builder, guess what's happening? They're not just considering me, they're considering many other builders as well. So I have a lot of competition. I'm competing against their old solution, which might be an old house or it might be an apartment, but I'm also competing against all the builders that they have looked at. And unless I'm the favorite, I'm going to be having to prove myself. This happens a lot in B2B, where by the time you respond to an RFP, you think you're competing for this business, but what's happening is that the person has already picked a favorite. They're trying to justify that favorite. They're trying to make sure they're not making a mistake, that there isn't something out there that is just way better, right? And as long as you're not way better, they're going to stick with their favorite. So that's why this is a better place, of course, but it's still not the best place. So there's actually a builder who, Bob Moore, some of you who follow Jobs to be Done may have heard his name. He also is one of the thought leaders in Jobs to be Done, but he was a builder in some part of his career. And what he did is he went out in March and April interviewing people, doing some of the things I'm talking about, trying to understand when did the trigger for buying the house occur. So people bought in March and April, but the trigger happened much, much sooner. And I think you can kind of see where I'm going. The trigger actually happened around the holidays, especially Thanksgiving. What happens in Thanksgiving? We have a whole bunch of family in our house. So our home, which was perfect for 2 people or 4, that's smaller. So at that point, we begin to ask ourselves, hey, we are doing well. Maybe we should upgrade homes. Our families are getting bigger. The kids are getting older. By next Thanksgiving, we won't fit in this house. So we better buy next year, right? So that's the triggering event. So what did Bob do? He actually, when everyone was lowering their ads after Thanksgiving, that's when he spent all his advertising budget for that year. And he was not trying to sell them. That's the key part. At this point, the reason it's the best time is that the only competition is the person's current alternative, and they are beginners. So here's somebody who may have had a home. Now it's too small. They're considering a new home like I was considering a new car. A lot of things to process, a lot of questions in their head. So if I go do some passive research the day after Thanksgiving, find this builder who is being super helpful and has all this content, guess what happens? I start to read his articles or her articles. I become affiliated. I start giving them my email address. And the next thing you know, when it's March, I'm checking out their homes. And that's exactly what Bob did very effectively. So again, triggering events, very, very powerful. So the worst time to advertise is not holidays. It's just you're running a different type of ad. So hopefully that kind of gives you some insights. There are many other places we can apply this. We are kind of running low on time, so I'm going to cut it short here. So this was just picking one of the forces or one of the aspects of the forces, which is the triggering event. But as you can see from this list here, you can use the triggering event. You can identify your true competition depending on when you go into market. That is whoever your customer is looking at. So you want to figure out their consideration set, where they might go. Those give you channel ideas and a lot of things that you can get out of that. If you can do this work, you essentially build, at the end of the day, a mafia offer. And I call it a mafia offer from the movie The Godfather, because an offer your customers cannot refuse. Because you have done all the research for them already, it just fits like a glove. So unlike The Godfather, you're not strong, you don't have to stronghold your customers. They just buy from you because you've done all that research. We can apply the same thing in retention, so we can use these to reduce anxieties as people are using your own product. Going back to something I said, if you can uncover problems in your own product, because so this is the thing, there's no such thing as a perfect solution. Even your shiny new object, your shiny new product is going to have issues. And you should be the first one to uncover it, because if you don't, guess what's going to happen? Someone else is going to come along and say, fire you guys and fire this instead, and people will switch. So you want to make sure that you uncover that before they do. That's what retention and then eventually referrals is about. Referrals kind of uses a story arc, so you can get your customers to tell the story. When we go and watch Hollywood movies, if the movie was only the hero has a problem, the hero finds a solution, the hero solves it, and it's the end of the day, that would be a 10-minute film, and it would be boring as hell. Right? So you want a bit of the reality, like what was their objection, what were their anxieties, how do they overcome it? So you want to tell a more compelling story. So when you're building testimonials, if you just say, hey, I love this product, it's great, that's a nice testimonial, but it doesn't say anything, right? So you can actually build better stories. So I'll share this in case anyone's interested. We are turning a lot of this into workshops. So if you're fine, you can go to innovatorsgift.com. Check out some of these workshops we're running. There is one that's tomorrow, which of course is last minute. I don't expect any of you to be there tomorrow, but if it happens to fit your schedule, that would be, love to see you online. But we are going to run a number of others just throughout the year. So I'll just leave that here for a second. I see some people taking pictures. But I'll stop here, and maybe we can spend a few minutes for questions that you might have on anything I presented.
All right, give it 1, 2. Give it up for Ash, please. That was fantastic, and I think I like a lot of the ideas here, and I can't wait to try some of those, and I'm sure you are probably feeling the same way. Now we're going to have some questions. I'm trying to locate Mark. Mark, where are you at? Oh. Where are microphones? There's more. So who wants to ask the first question? Oh, we got one right here.
Thank you. Hi, Ash. Starting from the lean, and again, I'm coming from the lean canvas, that particular practice, and we identify the target, come up with some kind of a market sizing. I'm positioning that against what you said, build it for 10 customers,
Sure.
Get it going. How do we convince that today I've got only 10 that I can see, I want to release it for 10, whereas, I can't say management, but let's say the funding of it would
Sure.
be like, I can't do that, approve it without a right market sizing, and that kind of extends the whole project into not more than 3 months. It could be more than that.
Yes, and so that's a very real problem. After the first book, a lot of people is they got outside of the building, they validated this with 10 people, but when they got to their stakeholders, they said, well, that's interesting, but show me the big business, the business model. So they would give you a spreadsheet and say, do the Excel magic there, and come back, and then we'll fund this. And that is not, again, people drown a lot of numbers. You end up doing a lot of these big plans, which it's hard to fill because you don't know all the answers yet. So actually, so after running lean, I wrote a second book precisely to answer that question, which is scaling lean. but it goes completely into the metric side of things. And I mean, what you asked me is the textbook question that people would ask, which is how many interviews do I need to run, how much validation do I need to show? And so we actually built a simple model. So just like the lean canvas is a model that replaces the chapters in a business plan, the piece that was missing was the spreadsheet that's also included, the forecast spreadsheet. But we didn't want to start with hundreds of numbers, and so we only started with 7 metrics. So those 7 metrics, if you're familiar with pirate metrics or the R metrics, those are 5 of them, and then there are 2 more. But using that, you can actually build a model that is built on inputs. If you look at the spreadsheet, it's a powerful exercise. The problem is, as someone described once to me, there are too many numbers, and each number is built on a web of lies. So they're compounding lies that by the time you go a few cells down, the number becomes very fantastical. So when I've done that in the past, I've had to bring back the spreadsheet into this realm of reality because my stakeholders would not believe that I could build something that amazing. And that's the problem with the spreadsheet. So what we want to do instead is do an estimate, and that's what this exercise is about. So if you search for traction roadmap or traction model, that's what you're asking is something we built to answer that question. So it shows to your investors why 10 is the right number now, but in 3 months that number is going to be bigger and it's going to be bigger, and so it's a roadmap that you can show, and they can at least then hold you accountable to that, and you can also hold yourself accountable to that, and that's the point of that exercise.
Others?
So Ash, in the spirit of that answer and then the discussion around ignore personas, if you had to start a business today and you could solve an adjacent problem for your existing customers or a new problem for a larger customer base, but it would take more work up front, where would you start?
It would take more work relative to...
You could do a medium amount of work to solve an adjacent problem for your immediate customer base. So you've got people that you've got a relationship that you could sell additional stuff to, or you could solve a problem that potentially had more customers but took more work to get there.
Yeah. So in some ways, I would if you ask me, like, you know, in terms of how I would approach it from a process perspective, I would start by modeling both of those alternatives, because without, again, the numbers, you know, I like to channel this adapted Alice in Wonderland code, is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So I would say A or B or both. You know, I'll do both of them. But to be able to answer that question, we have to first look to see what the traction roadmap looks like for each one, what the effort takes. One of them could be a very different type of business. So oftentimes people look at the business I've run, you know, they've been bootstrapped, they've not been, you know, big VC rounds of money. That's because I prefer it to be that way. So that's a constraint I have embraced. Now others would think that that's no good. They want to build a $100 million business, have 100 or 200 people in the company by 3 years, 5 years, and that's a path they want to take, right? So to me, if you look at the net outcomes of both founders, you may end up in the same place, but the journey is very different. So to me, I can't answer that in a hypothetical, but I would start from a process perspective of looking at each idea and then putting layers of risk, putting layers of even self-ambition and kind of team and what it takes to kind of tackle both of those to figure out which one to go against. And if they're both kind of near equal, again, you can then run experiments to see which one can possibly grow faster and double down on that one. So the way I like it, maybe just one last thing, I know I'm going on, but what I often say is that every good business is going to take many, many years of your life. So you want to make sure that whatever good is good enough. Just like we're trying to define what better means from a customer perspective. You need to define what does a good business mean to you and chase it only if it can deliver that, and otherwise go do something else with your spare time. I think there's a question at the very back.
So when you're getting ahead of the buying cycle, essentially it was a lot of B2C focused. In a B2B world where there's protracted buying cycles, everybody already knows the cyclical buy happens at the end of the fiscal year. Do you have any thoughts on how you get ahead of that? Because it's essentially a perpetual marketing engine that there is no end.
Yeah, so this is where some of the good salespeople, and there are some books that I've run across that mention this, that they don't call it that, but the idea of triggers has been in sales for a while, and some of the good salespeople look for triggers. So in a B2B context, that's usually hiring and firing. if your product is a capacity thing, the moment somebody hires their 100th employee or their traffic hits a certain threshold, guess what? They're looking for a new solution, looking for a new HR, new payroll solution. So the salespeople try to look for those types of signals and triggers, and they only go there and they can try to establish themselves as a favorite when they can target those types of things. And so in the very early stages, you might even be looking for signals of that signal, the language people use. Because remember, this is something that is key, is that when people go, like in my case, from having a solution like an existing car to considering new solutions, I go from being an expert in the old to a beginner in the new, right? So when I switch from skiing to snowboarding, if anyone has done that, you go from being pretty good at skiing to being an absolute beginner at snowboarding. And at that point, you're falling down, you're stumbling, you're looking for help. If you magically show up and say, yeah, your HR system is crashing, and you can talk about specific problems that company is facing, guess what? They're going to be stuck to you like a magnet and say, yes, I'm not ready to buy yet, but I want to learn more because these are triggers. Last week it crashed, this week something else is happening. So before they even make that decision to buy, if you can show up, that's powerful. Now it does take, even just thinking or brainstorming about the triggers. Even if you have customers, interviewing them and figuring out what, especially if you have become friends with them, interviewing them to figure out what their triggers were. Sometimes it's a very, from our perspective, silly thing. It could be an internal thing. It could be something they observed. It's not always that they landed to your landing page and said, oh, this is the perfect product for us. Let's buy this, right? It's never that straightforward.
Others? Going.
Well, people are thinking. I actually have one question. Going back to the first part of your talk and how we as humans tend to think in solutions and not so much as problems. As a product person, and I know some of you probably shared similar experiences, sometimes when we're in meetings, people love to talk about solutions, and you might be the only person that's like, wait, what about the problem? No one cares about the problem. They already figured out the solution. They're off to the races, and you're scratching your head like, well, no one's talking about the problem here. So how do we actually help people start thinking about problems first? How do they not get attached to solutions so much? And product people also work with engineers, and engineers like to talk about solutions. So how do we find that balance?
Yeah, it takes discipline. So even in my team, which is a very small team, I used to be, I'm the CEO of the company, and so I would see a metrics problem. I'd go into a meeting and say, we are seeing this problem. It's probably because of this. And everyone in the room said, yes, it's because of that, right? So guess what? We have one idea to go test. And if I'm wrong, my whole company is riding on my, analysis of what's going on. So I was doing all the work. And so I said, I'm going to stop doing that. And so we have this, and it's a technique we stole just from the design thinking community of separate problem from solution. So I would run that same meeting this time, and I would say, we have this problem, and I would get everyone just to see the problem. I would align around the metric. I don't know why this is happening. People, hit the step, and then they get stuck. And so I would turn to my developers, and I would say, can you go and look at that? I would turn to my designers. I would turn to my marketers. And guess what happens? My developers come back sometimes with build solutions, or oftentimes with build solutions. Let's build more features. Let's make the site faster. My designers come back with UX solutions. My marketers say, let's just run more ads, or let's do better content on the page, right? So that's a bias in itself. But again, what's different here is that I'm now getting a diversity of ideas, because the next big idea could really be any one of those. And if I just throw mine in the hat, that's the Amazon hippo problem, the highest paid officer's opinion. Everyone aligns with that, and you just stifle all. No one's going to go up against me. No one's going to bring their voice. So that's a very simple technique, is get into meetings and talk about the problem. Say, I have some ideas, but I'm not sure about it. How about we all go away, independently come up with some solutions, and then let's come back and vote on it. And let's vote on the most promising one, and let's do it that way. So that, to me, is just one simple technique to kind of start to change that. And it does take discipline, because we are all so wired to be the smart one in the room. It's, here's a problem I see, and by the way, I think it's happening because of this. That last part, you have to hold yourself back. There's a question there.
Hey, Ash, thanks. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or recommendations. So if there's a very clear kind of problem, like I need to hang a tool rack or something like that, and existing solutions versus very complex, kind of multi-layered problem, and existing solutions, if you have any recommendations on frameworks to kind of break some of those downs where it's multifaceted.
Yeah, so I would start with, even if it's a complex solution, it's often hired around what we sometimes will call a big hire. Like there's something about it that got that person's attention. There's the one either feature or capabilities that said, compared to what I have today, this gets me over there. And then down the road, that changes. So if you look at examples like Apple Watch, when it was coming out, I would ask people, because I was doing research for all this to see if it really worked. I would ask people, are you going to buy an Apple Watch? What are you going to buy it for? And surprisingly, they clustered around a few things. Even though it could do a lot of things, there were a few things that just came up over and over again. So that's, again, where I would say is that a lot of this work is a bit different from the lean canvas. So I think the lean canvas is still powerful in taking your initial snapshot, but then you want to get outside and do some of this discovery. The big insight here is that problems cannot be validated. They have to be discovered. If you have your top 3 problems in a lean canvas, turn those into a survey or ask people rank those problems, they will do that. And that's kind of the running lean technique. And I know I'm contradicting myself, but I'm allowed to because I think there's something better, right? So this approach is saying, I have these top 3 problems I think are right, but let me go and explore why are people buying, how are people getting this job done? And if your top 3 problems show up, then pat yourself on the back. But if it's something else, then wouldn't you want to do that instead? So that's what this approach is about. So in your instance as well, I would find that complex product, go back to that buying, purchase, procurement cycle, and you'd be surprised, but there'd probably be only a few things that really kind of move them towards picking that vendor or your product versus some of the others. Yes, Bill? Actually, just wait for them. Fine.
Yeah, right at the beginning, you jumped on the right-hand side of the lean canvas now to find your first customer. Do you have any good techniques for how to do that?
To find the first customer?
Determine.
Oh, determine.
Right.
Well, yes.
Right.
Yeah, so that first customer to me has to have a triggering event. So maybe to illustrate that, let's say I've solved a meeting coordination problem. And anyone who has tried to book meetings with 3 or more people know what I'm talking about. It's impossible in the work environment. But let's say I even make it more complex. We do it in a B2C environment. So dinner and movie with 5 friends. Not infinitely, but much more complex because you have more choices. Where do we eat? People may have different choices, allergies, preferences, movies, whatever you watch, what's on playing, all that stuff has to come together. So let's say I've solved that problem. I have a mobile app on iPhone and Android, and I ask you, would you be interested in being a beta user of mine? Probably a lot of hands will go up in the air, and that's confirmation bias. That's the wrong way to validate the problem. What I want to do instead is, if I apply this method, is I want to find who has had the triggering event. So what I'm going to ask is a very different question, which is of everyone in this room, and we have a big audience, how many of you have tried to book dinner and movie with 5 friends in the last 90 days? It's a real question. Maybe a show of hands. Anyone tried it? So a few hands go up. But see, it's a very small number. Those are the only people I want to talk to. Those could be my potential customers. Everyone else, you're fired. I have no interest in talking to you, right? Because what you're going to tell me is, you're going to give me feedback on, yes, this looks interesting, this looks nice. If you're a technologist, you'll put that hat and say, I can see this working. You'll get into all that hypotheticals. If you have not been triggered to go on dinner movie with 5 friends, you will probably not change behavior just because this product is out there. So I want to start with those that have tried it, do all this work, understand what tools they use, what problems they ran into, how long it took. Were all the people who raised their hands successful with the job, sort of? Some people saying no. So exactly, there is room for innovation. If you want a problem worth solving, there may be one there. Now, not a lot of hands went up, but it may be worth exploring. In a room, there are always at least 5 or 6 people that raise their hands. So to me, that's the way we would go about it. So I want to find people that have been triggered, understand what was the existing alternative, where did it fail, and then if I bring my solution in the mix, I can cause switch. If the market is big enough, I can cause switch with more people. You all maybe, the ones who didn't raise my hands, could be my latter stage customers, but those are my early adopter ingredients, my early adopter targets to start.
All right, let's do 2 more questions.
All right.
Have you had occasions when your lean canvas became a parent canvas and then they start having child lean canvases.
Sure.
I can talk a little bit about that. So the problems, the top 3 problems, they were massive. We got to know what the problems were, and yes, that is all pervasive. So we listed that. So the solution became a dinosaur.
Yes.
Okay, so now, going by that, the lean canvas style where you develop, then release, and then you learn the build, measure, learn type thing, then we have to break that down, that entire solution into smaller products, and hopefully that itself will start generating revenue. So that means that I need a lean canvas for that much, that little thing. So looks like those problems, the big problems, I need to get more granular. So any thoughts around that? So should I come up with a second lean canvas or probably a third lean canvas and go granular and identify more use case level problems and build that smaller 3-month projects?
Yes. So,
what are your thoughts?
So I think without looking at the canvas, I can just throw a bunch of areas that I would look at. One of it might be customer segmentation. So if your customer segment is broad already or broader than it should be, you may be getting lots of problems. So I may look to narrow those ones down. And this is where we run into the Goldilocks problem. The Goldilocks problem is trying to find the right size of the canvas. We want to be narrow and specific on one hand, but still have it be a big enough opportunity. So this is where you would want to model multiple canvases to see customer and problem, can I find the right fit? Another symptom when you have very high level problems is you might be able to apply a 5 whys type of technique. So ask yourself, why is something a problem? And you go down multiple levels. Some problems could be problems are, like someone asked in the back, could be a month 3 or month 4, month 5 problem, but not what you need to launch. So I would incorporate that into the equation. So by that definition, I sometimes like to throw out the iPhone 1. It was MVP. Apple would never call it that, but it had lots of missing features. It got them their foot in the door, and just 2 days ago, or last week, they announced their 10th iPhone, which has been adding more and more things ever since. Now, they could have thought of many of those things day one and delayed their launch by 2-3 years. They didn't, because the one job that they were doing is stop carrying 3 devices, a music player, MP3, iPhone, phone, and some kind of a PDA, put it on one device. That was what they were interested in launching with. So you have to, that's to me, the heart of the MVP is strip it down to a unique value proposition which can cause switch. That's very key. If you go to your customer and say, I will build you this, will they give up their existing solution for yours? And if they don't, then you don't yet have the right MVP definition. So I know it maybe didn't directly answer it, but there are a number of places, if I were looking at the canvas, to try to look to see how can you either split the canvases or try to reduce scope. And you may still end up in multiple canvases, but at least it now gives you more specific ones to go and test and then pit them against each other.
All right, last question.
Make it a quick one. No?
That's it? Yep.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
give it
thank
up
you very
one
much.
more.
Let's wrap this up. Okay. So our next event is sometime in the fall. Is it fall yet? But quick show of hands. If you guys know of a place that you would like to have a happy hour up north, right, how many of you up north? How many are you further down south? Okay. So how many would you like a happy hour around the Domain area? Okay. How many of you would like it downtown? How many of you don't care? You wouldn't come anyways. Okay, we're just trying to figure out where to host it. But if you have any ideas, we're looking for a venue that can hold a fair amount of good people, so that people come in and go and so on and so forth. Also, if you came to this group and you signed up for the event, but you didn't sign up and join the entire group, you won't get our notifications. So be sure to join ProductTank Austin on meetup.com, and you'll get notifications for the next happy hour. And if I didn't already mention it, please fill out our survey, submit a talk idea, submit a blog article, and if you're interested in hosting or sponsoring, fill that out as well. Thank you very much indeed. And mingle, we have, let's say 15 minutes. Grab some food, take some stickers, and get home safely. Have a good night, everyone.